This is the Atlantic coast, and these are the ports the Axis have to hold to prevent D-Day. But how do you hold them? The answer is mechanized. Mechanized units offer the highest HP and defense out of all units in the game. You want your mechanized to be as high in HP as possible, therefore aim for about 35 combat width on them. You then put them on important positions. It doesn't have to be only D-Day. You can put them into Africa, on mountain lines, behind rivers, basically on whatever tiles you need to hold. The key is to gain entrenchment and to last stand the units whenever they are under attack. In HOI4 MP, Spain and Bulgaria are the countries that typically build the Axis mech wall. In single player, you can obviously perform this build as virtually any country that has rubber and that needs to defend. Tank Roach. The idea behind this build is you have red air or are generally set up to lose, and you just try to roach out for as long as possible. You do that by building good heavy tanks, spamming cheap infantry, going mobile warfare left-right for high organization, and then positioning your tanks on important supply hubs. Preferably terrain tiles in front of plain tiles. Wait for your opponent to approach, and once they do, you immediately kick them out. You can only do this so often, and eventually your position will fall. At that point, you just retreat to the next line and try to repeat the pattern for as long as possible. Typically, this is done by the Soviet Union, but it works with pretty much any country with enough space and industry. Inf Roach. If a tank roach takes too much skill for you, but you still want a roach, you can just do a normal inf roach. Go mass assault right side, spam 16 with infantry, draw smart fallback lines to reassign your units to once your previous line gets broken, and then once that line gets broken, you pull back to another line. If you are playing as very large countries, you can sometimes possibly have like 6 or 7 fallback lines prepared, for example as the Soviet Union. And this is possibly the easiest defensive build you can do, and it will work against every AI and the vast majority of players. Battle Plan build. One of the strongest builds in HOI4 is the infamous mass mode battle plan. This can, in many scenarios, especially in pure vanilla, actually be a viable or even the meta build for nations like the Soviet Union. The concept is simple: you tech rush and build gun free, you spam out as many 36 with infantry units as possible, and then you put the battle plan on aggressive and sit back and relax. You will have a lot of red bubbles at first, but don't worry, that's part of the build. The idea is that you exhaust the enemy's stockpile and manpower before you run out of your stockpile and manpower. This build is incredibly easy to pull off, especially as large nations like the Soviet Union, and it is incredibly difficult to counter even in high-level multiplayer games. If you ever find yourself in the very unfortunate situation of playing a nation like South Africa or New Zealand in HOI4 MP, your teammates might assign you the very honorable task of rushing and building super heavy railway guns. How to do this is quite simple. You go dispersed industry, build a land warfare facility, and rush for the railway gun tech. Once you have enough breakthroughs, start the special project. Now you get to have fun microing and building your railway guns. Plane factory build. A plane factory just puts almost all of his production on planes. In MP, this is most common for the US or also Italy. This works because establishing green air is incredibly busted in vanilla. CAS is a huge stat swing since it's a 30% modifier and it can go into either direction. So having CAS as opposed to the enemy having CAS, can make more than a 70% stat difference, which is just huge. Bombing is incredibly broken as well, and so prohibitively overpowered that you cannot have a functioning MP game without it being either completely banned, heavily restricted, or nerfed to the ground. Seriously, if you want to try it in SP, play the US, build heavy fighters, and put like 20 mils on strat bombers, and you'll easily bomb more than a third of the Axis industry. Paradox really has to fix this. Air controller. An air controller is just an MP concept where one nation with particularly good modifiers gets land-leased all the air and micros it. If you want to know more about air in general, go watch my air guide. Typically though, the nations that would do this would be Brazil for the Allies and Italy or Germany for the Axis. As the air controller, you need to spam the enemy air controller and try to rush down your air doctrine. And for the allied air controller, you also need to rush down for the base strike naval doctrine, as that makes your navs more powerful, and this is very crucial in defeating Axis submarines, which can be very difficult if you don't do it. An invasion build is very typical for the US, Japan and the UK. In this, your main fighting force largely consists of special forces, typically of mountaineer marines, and with those you invade strategic positions. These Marines can melt through mass mob, infantry, and even fight against tanks if used properly. A few important things to know about this build are, first of all, your support companies, especially your flame tank and your recon light tank, need to stack breakthrough, because otherwise you can't get breakthrough in any other way on special forces. You need to get it through tanks. Then you need to, or at least you should very much, exploit your special forces cap by converting a bunch of 2 whiffs to 50 whiffs. Then you can queue up your special forces, because for the time that they are converted to 50 whiffs, even if they don't have equipment or manpower, they do infinitely expand your special forces cap. And then you just delete the 50 whiffs or convert them back to 2 whiffs, whatever. And lastly, you need to stack special force modifiers, and this build is typically only really worth it for countries that can access 2 or more special force doctrines. Each finished special force doctrine gives you a 10% modifier for all special forces. So 2 is pretty important to have. Also, other important things to consider are advisors. Special force advisors are very nice to have. And what is also really important is that you only fight under green air. Like, your special forces will just bounce against tanks under red air. For this build, you really want to have green air. Naval up is most common on Japan players, but also often seen on the US. It just means that you put the vast majority of your industry into building docks and ships, and then try to beat the enemy's fleet, so that afterwards you can service raid their convoys with your main fleet and naval invade them freely. The ships you would be spamming would typically either be super heavy battleships or cruisers. If you want to learn more about naval combat, I recommend you watch my guide on it, but the basics are: death stack your fleet into one big stack, go base strike and be on always engage and never repair. Classic tank build. Germany and France usually mount the main offensives for their factions. They optimally do this through a classic tank build. The strategy is quite simple. You just go for the standard tank design. Depending on research and production, you go for Amtrax if you can afford it, otherwise you stick to Mechanized. Then you rush for the best available heavy cannon and radio and build your TD with that and as many armor and engine clicks as possible. Before attacking, you finish your doctrine, GBP left, and once planned up, you should be able to click pretty much anything in your way. In multiplayer, you would ask the rest of your faction to build enough infantry for you, but for single player bros, just go with cheap 16 width, anti-air, and if you can afford it, signal companies, just because the extra initiative makes it so that you don't get reinforced memed quite as easily. Anyways, that would be it. If you enjoyed the video, please give a like, hit the subscribe button, and see you another time. Goodbye.